Hello and welcome to Beat Everyone. Your regular host, Ben Flanagan, is on vacation this week, taking some much-deserved rest. So here I am, John Hammontree, filling in, joined as always by our resident Catholic and convict, Matt Scalisi.
What an intro, man.
Matt, later in the show, we're going to be discussing the ideal Alabama quarterback and receiver combo for a Hail Mary. We didn't bring you on to discuss who should be the new pope. I won't put you on the spot about that.
Yeah, I haven't done my conclave breakdowns yet.
Yeah, well, what is a huddle if not just a conclave to determine who the ball is going to next?
That's right.
But when the smoke clears, maybe we'll know who winds up with the ball in the end zone. But first...
I love that you wrote all these Catholic jokes in the intro.
I watched Conclave yesterday, and so I am feeling it. But speaking of Catholics, last week, Alabama did something that I'm pretty sure they haven't done since 2007. They had a commencement speaker. They had two commencement speakers, actually. When I graduated in 2010, we didn't have a commencement speaker because in 2007, I believe the commencement speaker spoke out against the Iraq War, and they just didn't have it again until 2025. What we had was friend of the show, Eli Gold, stand up and impressively read out all of our names as we got our degrees.
Not bad to hear your name come out of Eli Gold's mouth. That's pretty cool.
No, it was nice. It was nice.
Yeah.
And look, I've said for years that if they're not going to go out and get a big name for a commencement, they should just get Nick Saban to come on and tell the students about the process. And it finally happened. It just took the sitting president of the United States to make it happen. But Nick Saban was finally one of the two people who made the commencement address. And Matt, tell me what your initial thoughts on that event were.
Well, I mean, I will say, and look, withholding, we don't want this show to go down the path of getting into all of our opinions about the president. Every single person alive, I feel like, has a very strong opinion one way or the other about the guy.
You don't say.
But look, Nick Saban speaking at a commencement, as you said, it seems like something that should have happened before now. And we all know he's great at it. Nick Saban is a practiced public speaker. And on top of being good at the actual speaking part of it, which is a skill in itself, Saban, I think one of the unique things about him as a coach is that he really does have something to say. He is a person who seems to be very good at digesting all the lessons of his life and turning them into these sort of great little bits of wisdom that he's so good at delivering in a way that everybody can understand. I would say that's one of the things that made him a great coach to his players, but also one of the things that made him so a figure that the fan base at Alabama looked up to and trusted, is because he really projects that wisdom. And I thought he was great. I thought his message was really important and well done and well delivered. And I don't think you could ask for a better speech than that for a graduating class.
No, yeah. I mean, like you said, reactions to Saban opening for President Trump are mixed. There are, of course, people who are thrilled and delighted, and then there are people who are disappointed. But as Kevin Skarbinski pointed out this week in a column on AL.com, the message of his address wasn't controversial. He told students to be kind to everyone, take responsibility for their own actions, and to not focus on beating other people, which is to say he probably doesn't like the name of our podcast, but on being the very best that you can be. He yes. Actually quoted MLK to do it, to be the best street sweeper that you can be.
You're competing with yourself and I think that's what he often, I know it's funny for people to hear him say, you're not trying to destroy other people. The man who famously said, make their ass quit.
Right.
But,
right.
But like that, it really overall the process, like the Nick Saban thing was you are competing with your own standard that you've set for yourself. And so, yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's being process oriented instead of results oriented. Yes.
And it's interesting, for better or worse, love him or hate him, Donald Trump seems to have an affinity for Alabama football. This was his third appearance in Tuscaloosa, I think, and it's at least his fifth appearance connected to Alabama football. You have the national championship game in Georgia, and then, of course, a visit to the White House. It made headlines. It made Saturday Night Live, but this was one of two commencement addresses that Donald Trump will be hosting this year. And he said, roll tide. He praised both coaches. We know where Donald Trump now stands on Kalen DeBoer. And, he joked about Nick Saban coming back. Maybe that got the hopes up for the people in the crowd. But there are some speculation that Trump may issue an executive order related to NIL, and that perhaps Nick Saban's introduction was a way of having some influence on that. What are your thoughts on that? What is in play for NIL?
It's interesting, right? Because this is an issue that a lot of people, depending on where your skin is in that game, a lot of people have extremely different opinions about how this stuff needs to be handled. And, I don't think anybody is happy with the way that it works right now. But for example, I think where Nick Saban thinks it needs to be is very different from where the players think it needs to be, maybe even different from where other coaches think it needs to be, right? Saban, I think, has pretty much consistently said, I think players need to be compensated for the value that they bring to these programs and these universities, but it has to be under some sort of controls. It has to be under some sort of limitations, or else the competitive balance is going to get thrown off. It's going to create a total imbalance of power between players and coaches and universities. And, there are people who would say that that's what's best for the game. And I think that's certainly what Nick Saban thinks, but also there are people who would say, that you are limiting a player's ability to get what he's worth by doing that. So it's, if Saban is the voice that Trump listens to before he writes something like that, before he issues an executive order, I think it could be colored by that. And I also think whatever you think of the way that this president does business, a unilateral executive order has the potential, I think, to cause as much chaos as it settles.
Sure.
This everything that has happened in college sports in the last 10 years, all of this upheaval, a lot of it is sort of downstream from another decision that was made to solve a problem. This is the effect, like the chaos in college sports right now is what happens when you have the butterfly effect and it's 1 million butterflies and they're all flapping in different places, and it's causing all these waves to interweave with each other. And now we're solving problems that were caused by an attempt to solve another problem a few years ago. And to me, I think even a well-intended, well-informed person trying to pass some kind of executive order that's going to fix this, you're going to cause other problems that then have to be dealt with.
Right. It would immediately be challenged in court, like a lot of other executive orders have been. And yeah, there's no guarantee even that a legislative fix would fix things. It might just cause more problems. We have talked on the show before. You and Ben have talked on the show before about the possibility of Nick Saban as commissioner of college football, which I think we all agree is a long shot possibility. But if Donald Trump can make John Voight ambassador to Hollywood, then I think he can make Nick Saban his college football czar and rely on him, informally, formally, for decision makings about football. And I imagine that there's already people in the comments right now telling us that we need to stick to sports. It's a common refrain. But over the last decade or so, that's been pretty hard to do when it comes to college football, especially with stuff like NIL on the table, or COVID, or Black Lives Matter, or conference realignment, or Florida State missing the playoffs, or a certain college football coach becoming senator and maybe our governor. College football is it's a political animal these days.
Absolutely. There's no way to keep it from becoming a political issue. Now, what it's not currently, I would say, is a partisan issue, right? And that's what a lot of people mean when they say political, is they mean that it's which side are you on, right? Which party is the one that's pushing for this particular solution? In this case, you do have politicians on both sides of the aisle trying to do something to fix this situation. And they don't there's not even agreement, I would say, among different Republicans, let alone
Right. Tommy
between
Tuberville and Ted
right.
Cruz have very different proposals to fix this. And Saban went and spoke to Ted Cruz's committee. I don't know which side he falls on in terms of Tuberville's solution or Cruz's solution, but like you said, there's differences within the Republican Party and within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because this is probably an issue, right? If we had to really break it down, this is probably an issue that is cared about more by people who live in red states. And I'm generalizing, that's probably mostly the case based on the population centers of college football. But that hasn't seemed to induce anybody to step up and really like take the reins on this. I think for the most part, this is an issue that politicians bring up because they know that they can win easy points by even saying we need to fix this. And nobody's
Right.
really going to yell at them for that or disagree with them about it.
Right. It's a situation where they can say for the next 3 decades, probably, we need to fix this without ever actually fixing it, which is to say it is a congressional issue. But, you talked about that left-right divide or lack of divide, and Saban is maybe a good figure to be at the center of that because he's very hard to put in a political box. He's kind of an ink blot test. People have speculated for years what party he may ascribe to, where he falls on the ideological spectrum. He's talked about how affected he was by the Kent State massacre from his time there as a student. He spoke in favor of getting the COVID vaccine, which was less political when he did it, but is certainly political in retrospect. He joined players in a Black Lives Matter march, and he participated in that video written by Alex Leatherwood. He's also urged his friend Joe Manchin to pass an expanded Voting Rights Act. That ultimately didn't pass, but then, like we said, he's been the guest of Ted Cruz in a Senate panel regarding college football. He's met with Presidents Obama, Trump, and Biden due to national championship victories. He keeps his views closely guarded. He's not tweeting every single political thought he has like Bruce Pearl.
Right.
If anything, he's an apolitical pragmatist, which lets everybody project their feelings onto him. And people certainly have a lot of feelings. And so the question is, when you hear people like friend of the show, Paul Feinbaum, say that Saban should run for office, how realistic a possibility is that? What's in it for Saban if he did run for office?
Yeah, well, I do think that he is a person who cares a lot generally about the well-being of the community, and whether that means Tuscaloosa or the entire country as a whole, right? Like the community of college sports. I think Saban is not one of those people who goes and shuts himself in his mansion and says, I don't really care what happens to the rest of the world because I got mine. I think he is a socially conscious person. And, I think a lot of that comes from his background. If you read about him growing up in a very working class part of West Virginia, that is a place where I think historically there has been a lot of sort of populism, for lack of a better term, but generally demanding from your state, from your congressman, your representatives, that they help the community, that they do things for people. And Saban, it has been noted, you said he's non-political, nonpartisan. But it has been noted in the past that Saban has had affiliations with the Democratic Party. And I think it's important also for people to recognize,
specifically Joe Manchin, though, right?
Joe
Anything
Manchin,
beyond that? Yeah.
But that's again, that's West Virginia politics, and there's context here for people who maybe don't know their history. Being a Democrat in West Virginia means something different than being a Democrat from California, for example. Very different things. And historically, especially, it meant something different in West Virginia. It was very affiliated with labor and the working class and unions. And that's the community that Saban grew up in. So I think it's tough because if we want to view everything through the political lens of 2025, and that's not what Saban grew up in, and it's probably still not how he sees the world. Things just didn't always line up that way, and it looks different. So I think that there are concerns that he has that could be considered political and that have to be addressed in a political way. And I think that I can see him looking at his influence and his ability to get in the room with people who have the actual power to do things, who can make stuff happen in the community on issues that he cares about, and look at that and say, I should be doing this. I should be getting involved in this because I can make a difference. Now, the question is, what's the price of doing that? And I don't know if that's something he thinks about or looks at or is aware of. But, look, even when it comes to this speech that he just made, right? You could look at it and say, I am associated with Alabama. Of course, I'm going to give a commencement speech at Alabama. But there's a lot of people who would look at that and say, hey, even by opening for Donald Trump, you're affiliating yourself with him. And that means that you are alienating a big chunk of people, maybe a smaller chunk than you would be in other states besides Alabama. But there's still a lot of people that live here and that are part of the University of Alabama community that don't like Donald Trump. I think even people who support Trump can admit there are a lot of people who don't like him and who don't like what it says for Nick Saban to sort of stand up on stage with him and be part of the same bill as him. So there is no way to get involved in partisan politics today, I think, where you are not alienating a large group of people. And that is something that Saban does not like to do. So that to me is what will always keep him out of running for office or being directly involved in politics in a bigger way than being a specific advocate on a certain issue, right? Like I don't see him doing the sort of harmful part of politics that is basically necessary to do if you get involved as a candidate.
Well, and I think that we would probably be better off if the majority of the country and the majority of politicians looked at problems for solutions as opposed to partisan bickering. If people looked at the world like Nick Saban does,
right?
But that doesn't mean he would be a very effective senator because he would be one of 100, and he is used to being the guy at the top. He's, being one of 100 is.
Well, and here's the other thing,
is
John.
not an executive role. That is a deliberative role, and that is, I'm sure Saban. I mean, we've seen Saban be great at that before, but I don't think that's something he needs to be wasting his time doing. If he's getting bored, let's put him back on the sidelines and not in.
We talked about a minute ago too, right? That he's about process. He's process oriented, not results oriented. Well, that ain't how politics works in America right now.
No, this ain't
the way that both sides view things right now is we can't do anything if we don't win. So winning is the most important thing, and we'll do whatever we have to do to win, and the rest of it will follow afterwards. That's the opposite of how Nick Saban approaches problems. He says, for him, it is do things the right way, solve the problems, and the wins will follow. They'll come as a result of that. And that just isn't the way that the political parties in America think right now.
Right.
And probably for worse, as you said, but that I think that he would not jive well with that.
Right. Now, that said, as we said at the top of the show, there is another job opening that I think he would be a great fit for. He's Catholic. I don't understand Catholic law, Matt. Does he have to be a cardinal to be named Pope? Is this the Speaker of the House situation? Could we have Pope Nick Saban?
You do not have to. I do not think you have to be a cardinal to be elected. I think the College of Cardinals can select whoever they want. I think you probably do have to be Catholic.
He is.
Which he is.
Yeah.
And Nick Saban actually, as a big part of the Catholic community in Tuscaloosa, for people who don't know, there is a Nick Saban, I believe it's the Nick and Terry Saban Center that is built onto the Catholic Church on campus at Alabama. So he is a very involved member of the church. I think issuing orders that have to be listened to by everybody would be highly appealing to him.
Yep.
I think The biggest problem facing him there is no lake in Vatican City.
That's true, but it's close enough to like Lake Como in Italy and stuff like that. He'd be fine.
Yeah, the papal pontoon boat.
Yes, but he'd have an edge over Notre Dame. I think it's worth him considering being Pontifex Saban. I don't, would he be Pope Nicholas? It'd be curious. If you have a thought of what Saban's Pope name would be, let us know in the comments. But we're going to say a few Our Fathers and move on to some Hail Marys.
Incredible. Oh, man.
Matt, what are we doing now?
Yeah, so look, last week we talked about the player that you want with the ball in his hands on 4th and 1. The running back that you want to give the ball to on 4th and 1. We even mentioned a couple of fullbacks, actually. But we're continuing on in that format. But today we're going to talk about the Hail Mary situation. And I want to get 2 players involved in this exchange, obviously, because you need to. We want to talk about the quarterback you want throwing the Hail Mary, and we want to talk about the receiver you want down there catching it. So, I mean, look, I'll leave this wide open. Do you have any immediate thoughts on this, John, before I give my picks?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this since you sent it to our text thread this morning, and I started texting with some friends about it. And we cannot agree on whether or not the Gravedigger play qualifies as a Hail Mary, because it was certainly a desperation heave from Jalen Milroe to Isaiah Bond to win the game there in Auburn. But, what were they far enough back? Is a 31-yard line far enough to qualify as a Hail Mary? And because it was a design play, is it a Hail Mary? Because that, to me, is the only Hail Mary to end an Alabama game, if you would call it a Hail Mary, that I can think of.
So I'm looking in Wikipedia right now.
I've already looked at Wikipedia. They call it a Hail Mary, but that's the controversial part.
Wikipedia defines it as a very long forward pass, typically made in desperation with a very small chance of achieving a completion. To me, I would call it a Hail Mary, not only because of the situation, but I do think 31 / however far back he dropped to make that pass, right? So let's call it 40.
Yep.
I think that qualifies as a Hail Mary, and it had to go to the back corner of the end zone. He had to wait on it, and there, I don't think that was a route. Like I know that they said that Gravedigger was like the call, but I don't know that they're necessary. I think it was a lot more waiting around for something to develop.
He was in the pocket for a long time. Yes. And it took a while for that play to develop. So I think that's not what we think of in terms of a traditional Hail Mary, where you are just heaving the ball down the field into a crowded space. Maybe it bobbles around and somebody just comes down with the ball. To me, if that's what we're talking about, then the receiver I want is Julio Jones. I just can't think of anybody else. I mean, there's a lot of great receivers. DeVonta Smith has made a number of insane catches, both in college and professionally. And then, of course, Ryan Williams. It's just boggling the mind every time we watch him play. But Julio is built to get up there and make a contested catch. And so that's who I would want catching the ball. Pro throw as well, Tyrone pro throw. But
I think you're right. I mean, it's hard to dispute anybody that would be better in position to do something like that. And actually, one example I would point to is if you go back and look at some of his NFL highlights. In fact, if you just search online for Julio Jones defense, there are highlight reels made entirely out of just Julio Jones post interception or like breaking up a potential interception, which is something he had to do because he never really had a great quarterback going to it. But Julio is just physically imposing. He is hard to win a one-on-one battle with. And I think that's absolutely who you want down in the end zone trying to go up and get it for you. Now, the bigger question I think here, John, is who do we want throwing this thing? Who do we want chucking it? And I will say I'll put us at an average of the 40-yard line. The the opponent's 40-yard line.
Right. Okay. I mean, you want somebody who can heave the long ball. Either Jalen would be able to do that. But if you're looking for accuracy for the long pass, then I feel like it's Mac or Tua. I don't know. I mean, because this isn't just like, a pinpoint pass in the back corner of the end zone. We're talking about just heaving it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes some touch. I think you got to land it where it needs to go. But yes, mainly we're talking about you're not hitting somebody in stride.
Right, you just want arm strength. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, it probably comes down to Hurts or Tua, I guess, would be the two that it is for me. But you know me, I've always been a Hurts guy. So I don't know. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I am going to go with a guy that I think was a little bit memed because of his long ball, but I'm going with Jake Coker here.
Okay. All right.
I think Coker has more elusiveness to buy himself time than I think people give him credit for. I think he had great touch, and specifically from that spot on the field, I'm thinking of all the times that Coker was able to put one perfectly on somebody. In particular, I'm remembering his Iron Bowl that he started in 2015. He had multiple touchdown passes that were basically thrown like Hail Marys as he was escaping pressure from just over the 50 into the enemy territory. I like that combo of stuff that he's got, and I think Coker also had something about him that, guys liked to play for him. They believed in him. They had confidence. I think that's also a big part of a Hail Mary play succeeding.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't discuss this. It's not in our notes, but let's flip it. If we're defending a Hail Mary situation, who do you want for the Alabama defense on the field breaking up those passes?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm gonna go with a throwback pick here.
Okay.
This is to me the most physically brutal safety that Alabama ever had, and I think whether he can high point it or not, he is going to jar the ball out of you and get there right on time doing it. And I'm picking Mark Barron.
Yeah, that's exactly who I was about to say. Was Mark
really?
Barron. Yeah. So Mark Barron comes to mind. Yep. Dre Kirkpatrick.
The other guy that I would throw out there is kind of a no-brainer because of how big he's gotten in the NFL, particularly at stuff like this. But Minkah Fitzpatrick is another guy that's just like he can absolutely do anything that a DB could ever be asked to do.
Yeah. Eddie Jackson, Brian Branch. I mean, I would like to see all of our guys lined up against each other and see who comes down with the ball.
Incredible collection of DBs in the NFL right now. My son, who's fairly new into football, but has gone all in on it, was asking me for a list of all the Alabama players that are in the NFL right now. And you can pull up a page, and it goes on for pages and pages. You have to keep scrolling. And his first observation was, wow, a lot of DBs from Alabama in the NFL. And to me, that is Alabama's most consistent, successful position at the next level has been the secondary guys.
Absolutely. As you may be able to tell from my backdrop, I am here in my basement, and there is a dog barking directly above me. So apologies if you are hearing that. But Matt, thank you for joining us this week, filling in for Ben Flanagan. As I said, I'm John Hammondtree. This is Beat Everyone. While Ben is off, do us a favor and go ahead and leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're following the show, share it with your friends. We want to try to grow it while Ben is gone, both as a present to him and as a way of just kind of rubbing in his face that we can do this without him. So until next time, I'm John Hammondtree. Thanks for watching.